as you all know, we call blood connective tissue, but it's an atypical type of connective tissue. The reason is because you have ground substance, which is the plasma, you have cellular elements, the RBCs, the WBCs, and the platelets, but you don't see the fibers, which are a necessary part of connective tissue because they appear only when blood clots, and the fibers are fibrin. Let's first look at red blood cells, and you can see the arrows pointing to the red blood cells. And what you notice about these red blood cells are they are small, they do not have a nucleus, so we call them anucleate, which means that they cannot divide, and they have, especially seen in the lower image, you can see that there's a central region of paleness, which is known as central pallor. And the reason is because blood cells, red blood cells, are biconcave discs, and so that the central region is very thin, and that's why we have a region of central pallor. And these red blood cells are very light staining, so they usually take up a very light pink, salmon, or beige color. So that's how you identify red blood cells. Let's now move on to white blood cells. And when you see white blood cells, they are basically classified into those with granules and those without granules. The ones without granules we call agranulocytes, and the ones with granules we call them granulocytes. Let's begin with agranulocytes first. And the first cell we're looking at is the lymphocyte. And here we have the arrows pointing to the lymphocytes. And what you notice about them, they have a large nucleus, very little cytoplasm. And obviously there are no granules. That's why we call them agranulocytes. When you look at the cytoplasm, you see how little there is of the cytoplasm, which tells you that this cell is not capable of phagocytosis, because in order to phagocytose, the cells need to have a lot of cytoplasm. Let's now look at the next slide, which is that of a monocyte. And monocytes are also agranulocytes. They have very, very large nuclei, which have a varied shape. You can see the nucleus may be kidney shaped, it may be, any odd shape. Again, they have a lot of cytoplasm, which is usually bluish staining, and these cells are capable of phagocytosis. We now move on to granulocytes, and the first one we are going to do are neutrophils. And you can see the arrows pointing to various neutrophils, and look how different each one looks. But what is classic about the neutrophil is that they have lobed nuclei. Usually you have 3 to 5 lobes. It may be that in some of them the lobe is not clearly seen, or it may just have 2 lobes. And they have abundant cytoplasm, and you also see faint colorless granules present in the cytoplasm. So the granules in the cytoplasm are very, very faint and colorless. The next cell we see in the granulocyte series are the eosinophils. And what is typical about the eosinophil is they may have bilobed nuclei, which we call, it has a typical sunglass appearance, or you may have a nucleus with more than 1 lobe, and which is what you see in the lower image. The granules are extremely well defined. Sometimes you might mistake it for a neutrophil, but when you see the granules really well defined, then you know it's an eosinophil. The granules may be red or pink, so depending on the color, you can see that the granules are red or pink. The next cell we are going to look at is the basophil. And in the basophil, the whole cell is extremely darkly stained. The granules are purplish, and they're so large that they completely hide the nucleus. So that's a very typical feature of the basophil. Let's move on to the last cellular element that you see in blood, which are the platelets. These are extremely small flower-like structures, and these are, you see in the lower image you can see just one platelet actually, but in the top image you can see a lot of platelets, and they are dispersed within the rest of the cells.